My sister walked into the courtroom wearing a cream coat worth $5,000, absolutely certain she would strip me of my inheritance before lunch. She brought a shark of a lawyer and our parents to witness my defeat, but she did not expect the man in the plain black suit who walked in 10 minutes late. He did not say a word. He just placed a sealed envelope on the desk, and suddenly, the air left the room. My name is Gracie Coleman. I am 33 years old, and sitting in that mahogany-paneled courtroom, I felt less like a grieving granddaughter and more like a defendant in a corporate espionage trial. The air in the room was stale, recycled through vents that had not been cleaned since the 80s. But around my sister, the air smelled exclusively of expensive vanilla and cold ambition. I kept my hands folded in my lap, hidden beneath the edge of the heavy oak table. I squeezed my fingers together until the knuckles turned white, a small, invisible anchor to keep me from shaking. Across the aisle, my sister, Vivian Coleman, did not look like someone who had just buried our grandfather. She looked like she was arriving for a board meeting where she had already secured the majority vote. Vivian did not wear black. Black was for people who felt loss. Vivian wore a cream-colored cashmere coat that probably cost more than my car, tailored to perfection, draping over her shoulders with a kind of soft, architectural dominance. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek, severe bun, not a single strand out of place. Her makeup was flawless, a no-makeup look that required 3 hours and a team of professionals to achieve. There was no redness around her eyes. There was no puffiness. There was only calculation. Behind her sat our parents, Mark and Denise Coleman. They were not sitting in the middle of the gallery to show neutrality. They were sitting directly behind Vivian, a visual wall of support. They nodded in sync with everything Vivian's lawyer whispered. Like bobbleheads on a dashboard, it was a rehearsed performance of family unity, designed to isolate the one piece that did not fit. That piece was me. They looked at me as if I were a traitor, as if my hesitation to sign over grandfather's estate the moment he died was an act of war, rather than a moment of grief. The judge, the Honorable Arthur Sterling, looked over his reading glasses at the assembly. He looked tired. It was 9 in the morning on a Tuesday, and he clearly wanted this over with. Vivian's lawyer stood up. He was a man named Mr. Sterling, no relation to the judge who wore a suit that shimmered slightly under the fluorescent lights. He did not speak to me. He spoke about me, as if I were a piece of furniture that had been placed in the wrong room. "Your Honor," the lawyer began, his voice smooth and practiced, "we are here on an emergency motion. The estate of the late Arthur P. Vance is significant, involving liquid assets, real estate holdings, and diverse portfolios. My client, Vivian Coleman, has been the de facto manager of these family affairs for years. However, the co-beneficiary, Ms. Gracie Coleman, has demonstrated a complete lack of cooperation." I felt the heat rise in my neck, but I kept my face blank. Lack of cooperation. That was their code word for asking questions. That was their code word for reading the documents before signing them. The lawyer continued, gesturing broadly with a manicured hand. "We have reason to believe that Ms. Gracie Coleman is a risk to the preservation of the assets. She has no experience in financial management. She has refused to communicate with the family regarding the consolidation of funds. Therefore, to protect the integrity of the estate, we are filing a motion to transfer full temporary control to Vivian Coleman effective immediately. Pending the final probate hearing, we need an order signed today." It was a power play, a classic, aggressive, corporate decapitation strike. If the judge signed that order, Vivian would have control of the bank accounts, the properties, and the records by noon. By the time I could hire a forensic accountant to look at the books, she would have moved everything into shell companies or trusts where I could never touch it. My father, Mark, leaned forward and whispered something to my mother. Denise nodded solemnly, clutching her handbag as if she were the victim of a great crime. They had turned a family tragedy into a business transaction. They wanted the money, and they wanted me out of the way. Judge Sterling flipped through the motion papers. The sound of pages turning was the only noise in the room. He looked bored, but there was a sharpness in his eyes when he looked up. "This is an ex parte request for immediate relief," the judge said, his voice gravelly. "That is a high bar. Counselor, you are asking me to strip a beneficiary of her rights before we have even opened full discovery. You are claiming she is a risk. What evidence do you have?" Vivian's lawyer did not hesitate. "Ms. Coleman has been unreachable for 48 hours. She has withheld keys to the primary residence. We believe she may be attempting to access the safe in the study without supervision. The assets are vulnerable. Your Honor, we are talking about an estate valued in the range of $50 million. Incompetence is as dangerous as malice." $50 million. He said the number casually, like he was ordering lunch. Vivian turned her head slightly and looked at me. It was the first time she had acknowledged my existence since we entered the building. Her eyes were cold, devoid of any sisterly warmth. It was a look of pure challenge. She was daring me to speak. She was waiting for me to stutter, to cry, to make a scene. She expected the emotional, messy Gracie she had mocked for our entire childhood. She expected me to scream that it wasn't fair. If I screamed, I lost. If I cried, I was unstable. If I argued about the money, I was greedy. They had boxed me in perfectly. The judge turned his gaze toward me. "Ms. Coleman," he said, "you are representing yourself today." "Yes, Your Honor." I said. My voice was steady. I was surprised by how steady it was. "Do you have a response to this motion?" the judge asked. "Your sister is asking for temporary control to prevent what she calls dissipation of assets. Do you object to her taking control of the estate today?" The room went silent. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. I could hear the scratching of the court reporter's machine. Vivian stared at me. Her lips curled into a faint, expectant smirk. She knew I did not have a lawyer. She knew I did not have the money to fight her legal team. She thought this was the moment I would fold. I took a breath. I unclasped my hands and placed them flat on the table. The wood was cool against my palms. "I object, Your Honor," I said clearly. Vivian's smirk widened slightly. She expected a rant to follow. She expected me to start listing childhood grievances. I continued, keeping my eyes locked on the judge. "However, I am not objecting based on the arguments Counselor has presented. I am objecting because this hearing is premature." "Premature?" the judge asked, raising an eyebrow. "The motion is before me now." "Yes," I said, "but the parties are not all present." Vivian let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound of pure derision, meant to signal to everyone that I was an idiot. "Everyone is here. Gracie," she said, breaking protocol to speak directly to me. "Mom, Dad, me, and you. Who else is there?" The ghost of grandfather. "Ms. Coleman, address the bench," the judge snapped at Vivian. Though he did not look overly angry, he looked back at me. "What do you mean, Ms. Coleman? Who are we waiting for?" I glanced at the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom. They were closed. Through the small rectangular windows, I could see nothing but the empty hallway. "I am waiting for the last person," I said. My father, sitting behind Vivian, let out a loud, exasperated sigh. "Oh, for God's sake," he muttered, loud enough for the microphone to pick up. "It is another one of her games. She is stalling. Your Honor, she does this." The judge frowned. "Ms. Coleman, this is a court of law, not a theater stage. If you have a legal representative coming, they should have been here at 9 o'clock. If you are waiting for a witness, you should have filed a list. I am not going to delay a hearing because you are expecting a mystery guest." "It is not a game, Your Honor," I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming more serious. "And it is not a witness. It is a matter of standing. My sister's motion claims she has the right to control the assets because she is the primary heir under the will she has presented. I am simply stating that we cannot proceed with that assumption until the last person arrives." Vivian leaned over to her lawyer. Whispering furiously, I saw the lawyer nod. He stood up again. "Your Honor, This is exactly the kind of obstructionist behavior we detailed in our affidavit. Ms. Coleman is inventing delays. There is no last person. The will is clear. The family is here. We ask that you rule on the motion now so we can secure the property. The pressure in the room spiked. It felt physical, like the walls were closing in. Vivian looked at me with open hostility now. Her quiet luxury facade was slipping just enough to reveal the teeth underneath. She tapped her fingernails against the table. Click, click, click. It was the sound of a countdown. "Sign the order, Your Honor," Vivian's lawyer urged. "Protect the estate." The judge looked at the clock on the wall. It was 9:15. He looked at the paperwork in front of him. He picked up his pen. "Ms. Coleman," the judge said to me, his tone final. "Unless you can provide a statutory reason to delay, I am inclined to grant the temporary relief. We cannot have millions of dollars in limbo because you have a feeling someone is coming." My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked at the clock. He was late. He was never late. Had I misunderstood? Had the email been a hoax? Had grandfather's final instructions been nothing more than the ramblings of a dying man? I remembered the last time I saw grandfather. He was frail, his skin like paper, but his eyes were sharp. "Gracie," he had said, "when the wolves come, and they will come, do not fight them with your teeth. Wait for the suit. Wait for the paper." "I am not asking for a delay based on feelings," I said, forcing myself to sound confident. "I am stating that any order signed right now would be invalid within 5 minutes. "That is enough," my mother hissed from the gallery. "Gracie, stop embarrassing us." The judge ignored her but glared at me. "I am ruling on the motion." He moved the pen toward the paper. Vivian sat up straighter, practically vibrating with victory. She had won. She knew she had won. She was already mentally redecorating grandfather's house, already planning which accounts to liquidate first. I did not look at the judge. I did not look at Vivian or my parents. I turned my entire body and looked straight at the double doors at the back of the room. "Please," I thought. "Your Honor," Vivian's lawyer said, sensing the judge's hesitation was gone. "The signature, please." The judge's pen touched the paper, and then the heavy wooden door clicked. It was a small sound, barely audible over the hum of the ventilation, but in the silence of the courtroom, it sounded like a gunshot. The handle turned slowly. The heavy door swung inward. The air in the room seemed to change instantly. The temperature dropped. The confident energy radiating from Vivian's side of the room faltered. A man walked in. He was not running. He was not out of breath. He moved with a terrifyingly calm precision. He was dressed in a black suit. Not navy, not charcoal, but a black so deep it seemed to absorb the light around him. It was a plain suit, unbranded, functional, like a uniform. He wore a crisp white shirt and a black tie. No watch, no rings, no jewelry of any kind. He carried nothing but a single, thick manila envelope tucked under his left arm. He did not look at the gallery. He did not look at my parents, who had twisted in their seats to stare. He did not look at Vivian, whose mouth had opened slightly in confusion. He did not even look at me. He walked straight down the center aisle, his dress shoes making a rhythmic, deliberate sound on the floor. Click, click, click. The judge lifted his pen from the paper. "Excuse me," the judge said, his voice booming. "Who are you? This is a closed hearing." The man did not stop until he reached the wooden gate that separated the gallery from the counsel tables. He pushed it open without breaking stride. He walked past Vivian's lawyer, who was too stunned to physically block him. He stopped directly in front of the court clerk's desk, which was situated just below the judge's bench. He placed the envelope on the desk with a soft thud. Then he turned, for the first time. He looked at the room. His face was unreadable. He had the kind of face that you would forget 5 minutes after seeing it, bland and professional. But his eyes were hard. He looked at Vivian, and for a second, I saw a flicker of genuine fear cross my sister's face. She didn't know who he was, but she recognized the aura. It was the aura of someone who did not care about her money, her coat, or her status. Then he looked at me. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. He turned back to the judge. His voice was not loud, but it carried to every corner of the room. It was a voice devoid of emotion, a voice that sounded like reading a contract. "I apologize for the delay, Your Honor," the man said. "Security downstairs was thorough." "Who are you?" the judge repeated, his patience gone. "Identify yourself, or I will have the bailiff remove you." The man reached into his jacket pocket. Vivian's lawyer flinched, as if he expected a weapon, but the man only pulled out a business card and slid it across the wood toward the judge. "My name is Elias Thorne," the man said. "I am here representing Kingsley Fiduciary Services." The room went dead silent. I saw Vivian's lawyer freeze. I saw my father's face drain of color. Even the judge blinked, looking down at the card and then back at the man. "Kingsley Fiduciary?" the judge asked. "Yes, Your Honor," the man said. He tapped the envelope he had placed on the desk. "I am here to file a notice of appearance and a certification of trust regarding the estate of Arthur P. Vance." "We have a will," Vivian's lawyer sputtered, trying to regain control. "This is a probate matter. We have the will right here." The man in the black suit did not even turn to look at the lawyer. He kept his eyes on the judge. "The document you hold is outdated," the man said. "The assets in question are not subject to probate. They were transferred into a private trust 45 days ago. I am the designated corporate trustee." He paused, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. "And," the man added, his voice dropping lower, colder, "I am here to enforce the terms of that trust against any party attempting to seize control of the assets unauthorized." I looked at Vivian. The arrogant, CEO-like posture was gone. She looked like someone who had just walked onto a frozen lake and heard the ice crack beneath her feet. I leaned back in my chair. The trembling in my hands stopped. I had told them I was waiting for the last person. He was here. The silence that followed Elias Thorne's introduction was not the kind of silence you hear in a library. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a bomb squad watching a timer tick down. The air in the courtroom seemed to thicken, pressing against my eardrums. My sister, Vivian, sat frozen in her chair, her posture rigid, her neck elongated like a swan that had suddenly realized it was swimming in alligator-infested waters. The man in the black suit did not move. He stood before the clerk's desk, with the stillness of a statue, his hand resting lightly on the thick envelope he had deposited. He offered no further explanation. He did not look at my parents, who were whispering frantically to each other in the back row. He did not look at Vivian's expensive lawyer, who was staring at the business card on the judge's bench as if it were a venomous insect. Thorne spoke again, his voice cutting through the tension with surgical precision. "These are documents for the court," he said. "From the grantor." Judge Sterling looked at the man, then down at the card, and then finally at the envelope. I saw the judge's eyebrows knit together. He reached out and picked up the package. It was sealed with a heavy red wax stamp, an old-fashioned detail that looked jarringly out of place in the sterile, fluorescent-lit room. It spoke of a different era, a time when a man's word was bound by honor and seal, not just digital signatures. "From the grantor," Judge Sterling repeated. "Arthur Vance is deceased. We are here to discuss his estate." "Precisely, Your Honor," Thorne replied. The instructions contained within were executed 48 hours prior to his passing. They are self-executing. The entity I represent, Kingsley Fiduciary Services, has accepted the role of corporate trustee effective immediately upon the grantor's death. We are merely filing the notice of administration to inform the court that there is no estate to probate. Vivian's lawyer, Mr. Sterling, shot out of his chair as if he had been electrocuted. His face was flushed. The smooth, confident shark I had seen 10 minutes ago was gone, replaced by a man realizing his retainer might be in jeopardy. "Objection!" he shouted. "Too loud for the small room. This is highly irregular. We have a valid will. We have a petition for probate filed and docketed. You cannot just walk in here with a secret envelope and claim the entire proceeding is moot. I demand to see those documents. For all we know, This is a forgery or a draft that was never finalized. Judge Sterling did not look at the lawyer. He was busy slicing open the envelope with a letter opener. The sound of the thick paper tearing was agonizingly loud. Rip! Sit down, counselor, the judge said, without looking up. But, Your Honor, I said, sit down, the judge barked. The authority in his voice snapped like a whip. Vivian's lawyer sank back into his chair, but he kept his eyes glued to the papers in the judge's hands. Vivian turned to look at me. Her eyes were wide, searching my face for answers. She wanted to know if I knew. She wanted to know if this was my doing. I kept my face entirely neutral, staring straight ahead at the judge's bench. Inside, my heart was racing, but I forced my breathing to remain slow and steady. This was the moment Grandfather had promised. This was the shield he had forged in secret. The judge pulled out a stack of documents. They were bound in blue legal backing. He adjusted his glasses and began to read. The room waited. 1 minute passed, then 2. The only sound was the judge turning pages and the soft hum of the ventilation system. Vivian shifted in her seat. The fabric of her cream coat rustled. She looked at her parents. My father, Mark, looked pale. He leaned forward and whispered to the back of Vivian's head. "What is Kingsley Fiduciary?" he hissed. "I have never heard of them." Vivian did not answer him, but I saw her throat bob as she swallowed. She had heard of them. Anyone who operated in the upper echelons of wealth management knew the name. Kingsley was not a bank. It was not a law firm you hired to get you out of a DUI. Kingsley Fiduciary Services was a fortress. They were an independent trust company known for being aggressively neutral, incredibly expensive, and utterly impervious to influence. You could not charm a Kingsley officer. You could not bribe them. You could not bully them with social connections. They answered to one thing only: the text of the trust instrument. If Kingsley was involved, it meant Grandfather had not just left a will. He had created a machine. Judge Sterling stopped reading. He looked up. His expression completely changed. The boredom and irritation were gone. He looked intrigued, perhaps even a little impressed. "Mr. Thorne," the judge said, "this is a certificate of trust." "It is, Your Honor," Thorne confirmed, "and it lists the primary assets," the judge continued, glancing at the page. "Real estate holdings in 3 states, the investment portfolio at Morgan Stanley, the collection of vintage automobiles, the intellectual property rights." "Correct," Thorne said. "All titled in the name of the Arthur P. Vance Revocable Living Trust, dated 6 months ago." Vivian let out a sharp gasp. 6 months? She blurted out. "That is impossible. We were with him every day. He never went to a lawyer." "Ms. Coleman, silence," the judge warned. But his eyes remained on the document. He looked over at Vivian's lawyer. "Counselor, did you run a title search on the properties before filing your motion for emergency control?" Vivian's lawyer adjusted his tie, looking uncomfortable. We were in the process of conducting a full asset inventory, Your Honor. Given the urgency of the situation and the risk of Miss Gracie Coleman looting the house, we moved for immediate possession based on the will in our possession." "The will in your possession is a pour-over will," the judge said, his voice dry. "It is a catch-all. It governs only assets that were forgotten or left out of the trust. According to this certification, there is nothing left out. The house, the accounts, the cars, they are not part of Mr. Vance's estate. They belong to the trust, and the trust is managed by Kingsley." The judge looked directly at Vivian. "Which means," the judge said slowly, "this court has no jurisdiction to grant you control over them. You are asking me to give you keys to a house that technically belongs to Mr. Thorne's employer." Vivian looked like she had been slapped. Her entire strategy had been based on the idea that the moment Grandfather died, the ownership of his empire entered a gray zone, a zone where she, as the aggressive, responsible older sister, could seize control and dictate terms. She thought it was a scramble for a loose ball. She did not realize the ball had been locked in a safe 6 months ago. "But we are the family," Vivian cried out, losing her composure. I am his eldest granddaughter. I have run his affairs for years. You cannot hand over our family legacy to some faceless corporation based on a piece of paper brought in by a stranger. I can, and I must, the judge said. The law is quite clear. A valid trust avoids probate. The assets bypass the court entirely. This is fraud. My mother, Denise, shouted from the back. She stood up, clutching her purse. Gracie made him sign this. She must have. He was confused. He didn't know what he was doing. Sit down, madam. The bailiff stepped forward, his hand resting on his belt. My mother sank back down, sobbing dramatically into a handkerchief. The judge turned back to the document. He flipped to the next page. He paused. His eyes narrowed. He read the paragraph twice. Then he looked up. This time, he did not look at the lawyer. He did not look at Thorne. He looked straight at Vivian. There was a strange look on his face, a mixture of pity and professional warning. Ms. Vivian Coleman, the judge said, you filed a motion this morning, a motion asking to remove your sister from the premises and to take immediate, unilateral control of all financial assets. Yes, Vivian said, lifting her chin defiantly, to protect the estate. And in this motion, the judge continued, tapping the file Vivian's lawyer had submitted, you alleged that the current arrangements were insufficient and that you demanded a change in how the assets were held. Yes, she said. The judge looked down at the Kingsley document again. I am looking at Article 9 of the trust instrument. It is a provision commonly known as a no-contest clause. Are you familiar with the term? The room went dead silent again. Even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. Vivian's lawyer went pale. He knew. Every lawyer knew. For those who are not legal scholars, the judge said, his voice ringing through the room, a no-contest clause states that if any beneficiary challenges the validity of the trust, or seeks to alter its terms, or attempts to interfere with the trustee's administration through legal action without probable cause, they immediately forfeit their entire share of the inheritance. They are treated as if they had predeceased the grantor. The blood drained from Vivian's face so fast it looked like a magic trick. She went from creamy pale to a sickly, translucent gray. Your Honor, her lawyer stammered, his voice rising in panic. The motion we filed. It was merely a protective measure. It was not a challenge to the trust. We didn't even know the trust existed until 5 minutes ago. You cannot apply a forfeiture clause based on a motion filed in ignorance. Ignorance is not a defense when you file aggressive litigation, the judge countered. You came into my courtroom swinging a sledgehammer. You demanded total control. You claimed the current status quo was unacceptable. That sounds very much like an attempt to interfere with the administration of the assets. We withdraw the motion, the lawyer shouted. Your Honor, we withdraw the motion immediately. Strike it from the record. The judge looked at Elias Thorne. Mr. Thorne, does the trustee view the filing of this morning's motion as a violation of the no contest clause? Thorne did not smile. He did not frown. He simply turned his head slightly toward Vivian, his eyes blank and terrifyingly empty. The trustee will review the transcript from today's hearing. Thorne said evenly, we'll evaluate the purpose behind the motion. If it was meant to sidestep the estate plan, Mr. Vance put in place, then yes, we will invoke the clause. These assets are meant for beneficiaries who honor the grantor's wishes, not for those who try to edit them after the fact. Vivian sat frozen, lips parted. Her hands so assured on the tabletop a moment ago now clamped the edge so tightly, her nails pressed into the wood. She'd come in here to break me. She'd come in here to take everything, to leave me with nothing, to make sure everyone saw she ruled the Coleman family. Instead, she'd walked herself straight into a trap she set. She stared at me, eyes blown wide with panic. She wanted me to speak. She wanted me to tell the judge it was fine that this was just sisters bickering, that she hadn't meant it. She wanted me to save her. I looked back at her. I thought about the years of snide comments. I thought about how she had isolated grandfather in his final months, telling visitors he was too sick to see them while she sat in his office moving money around. I thought about the way she had looked at me 10 minutes ago, smiling as her lawyer called me incompetent. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply looked at her with the same cold, flat expression that Elias Thorne wore. I leaned forward slightly, just enough so that she could see the movement. I did not speak the words out loud, but I shaped them clearly with my mouth. So only she could see. You just pressed the button. Vivian flinched as if I had thrown a stone at her. The judge cleared his throat. In light of the certification of trust, the motion for temporary control is denied. The court recognizes Kingsley Fiduciary Services as the legal owner of the assets. The probate matter is stayed pending a review of what, if anything, actually remains in the decedent's name. He looked at Vivian's lawyer. Counselor, if I were you, I would be very careful about what you file next. You are walking on a razor's edge. Yes, Your Honor, the lawyer whispered. Court is in recess, the judge said, banging his gavel. The sound of the gavel hitting the wood echoed like a final judgment, but it wasn't the end. I knew it, and looking at the man in the black suit, I knew he knew it too. This was just the opening move. Vivian was down, but she wasn't out, and a wounded predator is always the most dangerous thing in the wild. Thorne turned from the bench and began to walk back up the aisle. He stopped briefly as he passed my table. He did not offer a handshake. He did not offer condolences. Ms. Coleman, he said, his voice low. Check your email. Then he walked past the stunned figures of my parents and exited the courtroom, leaving the heavy door swinging in his wake. I looked at my phone, which was resting face down on the table. A notification blinked on the screen. It was from Kingsley Fiduciary Services. Subject account activation and security protocol. I picked up the phone. Vivian watched me, her eyes burning with a mixture of hatred and terror. She knew the power had shifted. She just didn't know how bad it was going to get. I stood up, smoothing the skirt of my black dress. I felt lighter than I had in months, the weight of my family's judgment, the crushing pressure of their expectations. It was all still there, but now there was a wall between us, a wall made of paper, built by the only man who had ever truly loved me. I turned to my sister. See you at the house, Vivian, I said softly. Oh wait, you don't have the keys anymore, do you? I didn't wait for an answer. I turned and walked toward the door, my heels clicking on the floor, following the path the man in black had cleared for me. The courtroom air was no longer just stale, it was heavy, pressing down on us like a physical weight. Judge Sterling did not release the tension. He leaned over the bench, his eyes locking onto my sister with a terrifying intensity. He was not looking at her like a judge looks at a litigant anymore. He was looking at her like a headmaster looks at a student caught holding a match next to a burning curtain. Ms. Coleman, the judge said, his voice dropping to a register that vibrated through the wood of the tables. I want to be very clear about what is happening here. You stood before me 10 minutes ago and claimed urgency. You claimed your grandfather left his affairs in chaos. You claimed your sister was a danger to the estate. Vivian swallowed. The movement was visible in her long, elegant throat. She tried to maintain her composure, tried to keep that mask of the grieving, responsible CEO in place, but the edges were fraying. I did. Your Honor, Vivian said. Her voice was thinner now, lacking the rich, authoritative timbre she had practiced. We only want to protect what grandfather built. The judge held up the document Elias Thorne had placed on the desk. This was not just a piece of paper. It was a certificate of trust, bound in blue backing, stamped with the seal of Kingsley Fiduciary Services. This document says you are lying, the judge said. It was not an accusation shouted in anger. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the cold indifference of a medical diagnosis. It says that Arthur Vance did not leave his affairs in chaos. It says he spent the last 6 months of his life meticulously organizing every single asset into a structure designed specifically to keep people like you out. Vivian bristled. The accusation of lying hit her ego harder than the threat of losing money. He was confused. Vivian shot back, abandoning her lawyer's strategy of silence. She leaned forward, her hands gripping the table. Your Honor, you have to understand. My grandfather was 89 years old. He was on medication. He had days where he did not know what year it was. If he signed that trust, he did not know what he was signing. He was influenced. She did not look at me, but the implication hung in the air like smoke. She was accusing me of whispering in his ear, of guiding his shaking hand, of taking advantage of a dying man. My father, Mark, nodded vigorously from the back row. He is right, Your Honor, my father chimed in, his voice trembling with feigned concern. Dad was vulnerable. We all knew it. We just wanted to preserve his dignity. Judge Sterling did not look at my father. He kept his eyes on Vivian. So your argument now shifts from protecting the estate to incapacity, the judge noted. He reached into the file that Elias Thorne had provided. He pulled out a second document. It was thicker than the first. I anticipated you might say that, the judge said, and apparently, so did Mr. Vance. The judge opened the file. This is an affidavit of capacity, dated and signed on the same day the trust was executed, but it is not just signed by your grandfather. It is signed by 2 independent neurologists who conducted a full cognitive evaluation 2 hours before the signing. It is signed by a geriatric psychiatrist who certified he was of sound mind, oriented to time and place, and fully aware of the extent of his assets. Vivian froze. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. And, the judge continued, turning a page with a sharp snap, it is accompanied by a certificate of independent review from a third-party attorney. An attorney who met with your grandfather alone, without Ms. Gracie Coleman present, to certify that the bequest was not the result of fraud, menace, duress, or undue influence. The judge held the page up. It was a wall, a solid legal wall built of concrete facts and professional reputations. This is what we call an ironclad file. Ms. Coleman, the judge said, to break this, you would not just need a story. You would need to prove a conspiracy involving 2 doctors, a specialist, a top-tier fiduciary firm, and an officer of the court. Do you have evidence of such a conspiracy? Or do you just have the fact that you are disappointed with the outcome? Vivian looked down at her hands. Her manicured nails were digging into the leather of her expensive bag. She had no evidence. She had nothing but her own entitlement and the belief that because she was Vivian Coleman, she deserved to win. Elias Thorne stepped forward. He had been standing so still I had almost forgotten he was there. He moved with the sudden, fluid grace of a predator. Your Honor, Thorne said. His voice was devoid of inflection. It was smooth, dark, and utterly unyielding. Kingsley Fiduciary Services does not recognize the standing of the petitioner to make any demands regarding these assets. We reject the request for immediate transfer. Furthermore, we formally request that the court dismiss any and all pending motions to seize control of the properties located at the addresses listed in Exhibit A. Vivian's head snapped up. She looked at Thorne with pure venom. You are just a bank, she spat out. You work for us, the family. Thorne turned his head slowly. He looked at her not with anger, but with a mild, professional curiosity, as if she were a mathematical error he was trying to correct. We do not work for the family, Ms. Coleman, Thorne said. We work for the trust, and the trust's instructions are explicit regarding the protection of assets from hostile beneficiaries. Hostile. Vivian stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. I am his granddaughter. How dare you call me hostile? Sit down, the judge commanded. The authority in his voice was like a hammer blow. Vivian blinked, realizing she had lost control. She sank back into her chair, her face flushing a deep, blotchy red. Behind her, the energy in the room shifted. My parents, Mark and Denise, were no longer nodding. They were no longer leaning forward to support their golden child. They were exchanging glances. It was the look of rats realizing the ship was not just leaking, but actively sinking. My father loosened his tie. My mother shifted her purse to her other side, creating a subtle physical distance between herself and Vivian's chair. They were calculating. They were wondering if they could detach themselves from Vivian's failure before it pulled them under. Vivian's lawyer, Mr. Sterling, wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. He looked like a man who wanted to be anywhere else in the world. He cleared his throat. "Your Honor," the lawyer said, his voice trembling slightly. We obviously were not aware of these specific medical affidavits. We need time to review them. We request that the court order the trustee to provide a full and complete copy of the trust instrument and all attached schedules so we can advise our client properly. We cannot be expected to accept these claims without seeing the full document. The judge looked at the lawyer over the rim of his glasses. The look lasted for 5 seconds. It was 5 seconds of excruciating silence. "Counselor," the judge said softly, "you are asking for a copy of the trust." "Yes, Your Honor," the lawyer said, trying to regain some professional footing. "Standard discovery. We are entitled to it." The judge picked up a piece of paper from the top of his stack. He looked at it, then looked at the lawyer. "According to the proof of service filed by Mr. Thorne," the judge said, "a full digital copy of the trust, including the medical affidavits and the notice of the no contest clause, was sent to your office email address yesterday afternoon at 4 o'clock. The room went absolutely still. I looked at Vivian. She turned her head slowly to look at her lawyer. Her eyes were wide, shocked. The lawyer froze. He patted his pockets as if looking for his phone. I may have missed it, Your Honor. I was in court all day yesterday. And," the judge continued, ignoring the excuse, "the proof of service indicates it was also sent via certified courier to the residence of Mark and Denise Coleman." My mother, Denise, let out a small, strangled sound. She turned her head sharply toward Vivian's lawyer. Her face was a mask of horror. "You knew," my mother whispered. Her voice carried in the quiet room. "You knew about the clause if the lawyer had received the documents yesterday. It meant he knew about the no contest clause. It meant he knew that filing the motion this morning was practically guaranteed to trigger the forfeiture. He had walked Vivian right into the trap. Or perhaps Vivian had hidden the delivery from him. Vivian looked at our parents. "Mom, I didn't open the mail yesterday. I was busy preparing." The judge slammed his hand down on the bench. The sound made everyone jump. "Enough," the judge shouted. "I do not care who opened their mail. The documents were legally served. You are charged with constructive knowledge." The judge leaned forward, his face hard as stone. "Ms. Coleman, counselor, listen to me closely. If you received notice of a no contest clause yesterday, and you still walked into my courtroom this morning to file a motion demanding immediate seizure of assets based on a false claim of urgency, that is not just a mistake, that is bad faith. Bad faith." The words hung in the air like a sentence. In the legal world, bad faith was the ultimate sin. It meant you were not just wrong. You were malicious. It meant you were trying to cheat the system. If I determined this filing was made in bad faith, the judge warned, his voice low and dangerous, "I will not just deny your motion. I will sanction you for wasting the court's time, and I will look very favorably upon any request the trustee makes to enforce the forfeiture clause." Vivian shrank in her seat. She looked small now. The cream coat looked like a costume she was wearing to play a part she did not understand. She had come here to play the role of the dominant heir, the smart one, the powerful one, but the script had been rewritten without her knowledge. I sat there, my hands still folded on the table. I felt a strange sense of calm. It was not joy. It was not triumph. It was the feeling of watching a storm break exactly where the weatherman said it would. I looked at Vivian, and for a brief second, our eyes met. I remembered something Grandfather had told me a year ago. On a rainy afternoon when Vivian had stormed out of the house after demanding he sell his classic car collection to fund her startup, he had looked at me, his eyes sad but clear. "Gracie," he had said, "families like ours, they do not kill you with knives. That is too messy. They kill you with stories. They invent a story about who you are, that you are weak, that you are crazy, that you are ungrateful, and they tell that story until everyone believes it. Even you. Vivian had been telling a story about me for 30 years. She had told the world I was the messy little sister, the failure, the one who needed to be managed. She had brought that story into this courtroom today. She thought her story was enough to strip me of my rights, but she had forgotten one thing. In a court of law, stories do not win, evidence wins. I saw the realization hit her. I saw the moment she understood that her narrative, the carefully constructed image of Vivian the Savior and Gracie the Problem, had just smashed into a wall of notarized facts. The judge looked at the lawyer one last time. "I am marking this hearing as a potential trigger event for the no contest clause," the judge said. "The trustee is instructed to provide a full report on the beneficiary's compliance within 14 days. Vivian closed her eyes. I did not smile. I just watched. The blade of the guillotine had not fallen yet, but the rope had been cut. It was only a matter of gravity now. The courtroom had fallen into a dangerous kind of quiet. It was the silence of a predator realizing the trap had snapped shut on its leg. And now, it was going to chew through bone to get free. Vivian sat there. The blood drained from her face. The thread of the no contest clause hanging over her head, like a guillotine blade. She knew she had lost on the technicalities. She knew the trust documents were perfect, but Vivian Coleman was not a woman who accepted defeat. If she could not win on the law, she would burn the house down to ruin the view. She turned to the judge. Her movement was sharp, jerky, lacking the smooth corporate elegance she had displayed 10 minutes ago. "Your Honor," Vivian said, her voice breathless and urgent, "I need to state something for the record. Something serious. We did not want to bring this up. We wanted to handle this privately, within the family. But you are forcing my hand." Judge Sterling looked at her over his spectacles. He did not look impressed. He looked like a man watching a bad actor try to improvise lines in the third act. "State your business, Ms. Coleman," the judge said. "But be warned, you are already skating on thin ice regarding the bad faith filing." "This is not bad faith," Vivian insisted. She stood up, smoothing the front of her cream-colored coat as if the fabric could armor her against the truth. "This is about the safety of a vulnerable adult. The reason we filed for immediate control is not just about money. It is about financial exploitation. It is about undue influence." The words hit the room with a physical force. Financial exploitation, undue influence. These were nuclear weapons in probate court. She was accusing me of elder abuse. She was accusing me of manipulating a dying man to steal his fortune. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I had expected them to call me incompetent. I had expected them to call me lazy. But this was different. This was criminal. "Explain," the judge said. His tone was not welcoming, but it was attentive. Allegations of abuse always required attention. "My sister," Vivian said, pointing a manicured finger directly at me without looking at my face. "Gracie moved into grandfather's house 6 months ago. Before that, she barely visited. Suddenly, when his health declined, she was there every day. She fired the nurses we hired. She changed the locks. She screened his calls. We could not get through to him." My father, Mark, interrupted. He stood up. His face twisted into a mask of pained righteousness. He placed a hand on his chest, right over his heart. "Your Honor, I am his son. For the last 4 months of his life, every time I called, she answered. She told me he was sleeping. She told me he was too tired. She isolated him. She cut him off from the people who loved him, so she could whisper poison in his ear." My mother, Denise, let out a sob. It was a perfect, heartbreaking sound. She pulled a fresh tissue from her purse and dabbed at her eyes. "He died alone with her," my mother cried softly. "We just wanted to say goodbye. She stole that from us, and now we find out she had him sign everything over to a trust while we were locked out. That is not a coincidence, Your Honor. That is predation. It was a performance worthy of Broadway. If I did not know them, if I did not know that my father had not visited grandfather in 2 years because he was too busy playing golf in Florida, I might have believed him. If I did not know that my mother only called when she needed a check for her country club dues, I might have felt sorry for her. They had rehearsed this. I could see it in the timing. Mark's outrage, Denise's tears, Vivian's accusation. It was a coordinated attack designed to paint me as a monster. "We have witnesses," Vivian said. Sensing the judge listening, she gestured to the back of the courtroom. I turned around. In the back row, huddled in the corner like they wished they were invisible, were my Aunt Martha and my cousin, David. They were good people. Mostly. Weak, but good. Aunt Martha had borrowed $20,000 from Vivian last year to cover her husband's gambling debts. David worked for one of my father's shell companies. They were owned. They were leverage. "Stand up," Vivian commanded them. It was not a request. Aunt Martha stood up slowly. She clutched her handbag with both hands. She refused to look at me. She looked at the floor, at the ceiling, at the exit sign, anywhere but at me. "Mrs. Reynolds," the judge said to my aunt. "Do you have something to add?" Aunt Martha's voice shook. "I just know that, well, Arthur was very confused lately, and Gracie was always there. It seemed like she was in charge." "And you?" the judge asked David. David cleared his throat. Yes, Your Honor. Uncle Arthur didn't recognize me last time I saw him. He just nodded at whatever Gracie said." Vivian turned back to the judge, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "You see, she took a man with dementia, isolated him from his family, and forced him to sign over $50 million to a trust she controls. That is why we filed the motion. We are trying to rescue the estate from a crime." I sat perfectly still. My hands were folded in my lap, but my fingernails were digging into my palms so hard I thought I might draw blood. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and shout that Aunt Martha had not visited in 3 years. I wanted to scream that the reason I changed the locks was because Vivian had let herself in at midnight to look for grandfather's banking passwords while he was sleeping. But I remained silent. I remembered grandfather's voice. "Let them tell the story. Gracie, stories are just air. Evidence is rock." Judge Sterling looked at the family. He looked at the weeping mother, the indignant father, the reluctant witnesses. Then he looked down at the file on his desk. "This is a serious accusation," the judge said. "Financial exploitation of the elderly is a felony in this state." "Exactly," Vivian said. "That is why we need to freeze the assets." "So," the judge continued, his voice calm, "where is the police report?" Vivian blinked. "Excuse me. If you believed your father was being held prisoner and abused for 6 months," the judge said, leaning forward, "surely you called the police. Surely you called Adult Protective Services. You are a wealthy, resourceful woman. Ms. Coleman, if you were barred from the home, you would have called the sheriff. Where is the report? Where is the case number?" We didn't want to embarrass him." Vivian stammered. "We didn't want police cars in the driveway. It is a private matter." "You didn't want to embarrass him," the judge repeated. "But you are willing to accuse his granddaughter of a felony in open court after he is dead." "We were trying to handle it delicately," my father shouted. "We are a respectable family." "Do you have a medical report from his primary care physician stating he was incompetent prior to the signing date?" the judge asked. Gracie fired his doctor. Vivian lied. She brought in her own people. The judge picked up the file Elias Thorne had provided. He opened it to the 3rd tab. "That is interesting," the judge said. "Because according to the trustee's file, Mr. Vance was seen by Dr. Eris Thorne, no relation to the trustee who has been his physician for 20 years. Dr. Thorne provided a sworn statement attached here. It says, and I quote, Mr. Vance expressed deep distress regarding his daughter Vivian's constant demands for money. He explicitly requested that I bar her from his medical release forms." Vivian's mouth fell open. "That is a lie. That doctor is lying." "And here," the judge continued, ignoring her, "we have a log from the security company. It shows that on the dates you claim you were blocked from visiting, the security system was actually deactivated for 8 hours a day to allow visitors. The log shows that you, Ms. Vivian Coleman, Used your gate code to enter the property 14 times in the last month. You were not blocked. You were there. The judge looked at her with eyes that were no longer just skeptical. They were cold. You were inside the house, the judge said. If he was being abused, why didn't you take him out? Why didn't you call 911? Why did you wait until the day after he died to claim he was a victim? He was afraid, Vivian screamed. She was losing it now. The cool CEO facade was completely gone. She was just a desperate, greedy woman who had been caught. He was afraid of her. She threatened him. Evidence, the judge said. I need evidence. A text message, a recording, a letter, a witness who is not financially dependent on you. Vivian looked frantically at her lawyer. Do something. Demand the records. Mr. Sterling, the lawyer, stood up slowly. He looked defeated, but he had to try. Your Honor, these are factual disputes. We cannot resolve them in a summary hearing. We request full discovery. We need to depose Ms. Gracie Coleman. We need to subpoena her emails, her phone records. We need to investigate the undue influence. You cannot dismiss these claims without giving us a chance to find the truth. Discovery, the judge said, savoring the word. You want permission to drag this out for 2 years. You want to drain the estate in legal fees, hoping Ms. Coleman will settle just to make you go away. We want justice, the lawyer said weakly. Discovery is not a fishing license, the judge snapped. You do not get to accuse someone of a crime with zero evidence and then use the court's subpoena power to go looking for proof you should have had before you filed the motion. The room fell silent again. Vivian was breathing hard, her chest heaving. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. She had thrown everything she had at me. She had used our parents. She had used our aunt. She had lied, and it wasn't working. I looked at the judge, then I looked at Vivian. I decided it was time to speak. Your Honor, I said. The judge looked at me. Ms. Coleman. I kept my voice low. I did not shout. I did not cry. I spoke with the exhaustion of someone who has carried a heavy load for a very long time. My sister is right about one thing, I said. Grandfather was afraid, but he wasn't afraid of me. I paused. Vivian glared at me, daring me to continue. If they had any evidence, I said, looking straight at Vivian, they would have slapped it on this table the moment they walked in. They would have led with it. They don't have a police report. They don't have a doctor's note. They don't have a single email. I turned to the judge. All they have is a story, I said, because that is how my family works. They think if they tell a story loud enough, it becomes true. But they forgot that grandfather knew their stories better than anyone. The courtroom felt like a vacuum. The air had been sucked out. Vivian looked at me as if she wanted to leap across the table and strangle me. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. She opened her mouth to scream, to deny it, to launch another accusation, but she stopped. She stopped because she saw the judge's face. Judge Sterling was looking at the trustee, Elias Thorne, and Elias Thorne was reaching into his briefcase again. Your Honor, Thorne said. His voice was the sound of a final nail being hammered into a coffin. Regarding the allegation of undue influence, the trustee was instructed to hold a certain document in reserve. It is a statement of intent, written in the grantor's own hand. Vivian froze. My parents froze. They had thrown their mud. They had made their scene. But they had forgotten that grandfather had played chess while they were playing checkers. He hadn't just protected the money. He had protected the truth. I believe, Thorne said, sliding a thin envelope across the desk. This will clarify who was actually pressuring Mr. Vance. Vivian stared at the envelope. For the first time in her life, she looked small. She looked like a child who realized the monster in the closet was real, and it had just opened the door. The envelope Elias Thorne placed on the desk was terrifyingly thin. It did not have the bulk of the medical affidavits or the heavy binding of the trust instrument. It was a simple, cream-colored envelope, the kind you might use to send a thank you card or a wedding invitation. But in the context of a courtroom where weight usually equals power, its lightness felt dangerous. It felt like a blade. The trustee was instructed to maintain custody of this document, Thorne said, his voice level and devoid of theatricality. It is a statement of intent, handwritten by the grantor, Arthur Vance. The instructions were to produce it only in the event that his competency was challenged by specific family members. Specific family members. The phrase hung in the air, isolating my sister and my parents in a spotlight of shame. Vivian, who had just spent the last 10 minutes painting a portrait of a senile, manipulated old man, went very still. Her chest, which had been heaving with the exertion of her performance, stopped moving. Judge Sterling reached out and took the envelope. He did not open it immediately. He held it for a moment, weighing it in his hand, looking from the paper to the man in the black suit. Then, he picked up his letter opener. Slit. The sound was sharp and final. The judge pulled out a single sheet of lined legal paper. It wasn't typed. It was covered in the cramped, jagged handwriting that I knew better than my own. I felt a lump rise in my throat. I had spent hours sitting next to grandfather while he wrote in his journals, watching that pen move across the page. Seeing it now, in this hostile, sterile room, felt like seeing a ghost. Judge Sterling began to read. He read in silence. His eyes moved left to right, then dropped a line, then moved left to right again. His face was unreadable, but the atmosphere in the room began to shift. It grew colder. The confident murmurs from my parents' bench ceased entirely, after what felt like an hour, but was likely only 2 minutes. Judge Sterling lowered the paper. He did not look at Vivian. He did not look at the lawyer. He looked directly at me. Ms. Coleman, the judge asked, his voice softer than before. Were you aware of the existence of this letter? I shook my head slowly. No, Your Honor, not exactly. You had no knowledge of its contents, he pressed. Grandfather told me. He told me he was writing something. I answered, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. He called it his insurance policy. He said, Gracie, the truth is a quiet thing, but I will make sure it screams when it needs to. He said he would leave the truth in his signature, but I never saw the paper. I never asked to see it. The judge nodded. It was a small, almost imperceptible movement, but it signaled that he believed me. He believed me because my answer aligned with whatever was written on that yellow sheet. Let the record reflect, the judge said, raising his voice to address the court reporter, that the court has received a handwritten statement of intent, dated November 14th of last year. This document was notarized by an independent notary public and witnessed by 2 officers of Kingsley Fiduciary Services. He turned his gaze to Vivian. It was a hard gaze. It was the look of a man who realized he had almost been manipulated. Ms. Vivian Coleman, the judge said, you just stood here and told me, under penalty of perjury, that your grandfather was confused. You told me he was isolated. You told me that Gracie Coleman exerted undue influence over him to secure his assets. Yes, Vivian whispered. Her voice was barely audible. That is what happened. I am going to read a portion of this statement into the record, the judge announced, because it appears Mr. Vance was not confused at all. In fact, he was remarkably prescient. He predicted this exact hearing. He predicted this exact argument. And he predicted that you, specifically, would be the one making it. Vivian's face drained of all remaining color. She looked like a wax figure melting under a heat lamp. The judge adjusted his glasses and began to read aloud. I, Arthur Vance, am writing this statement to be read only after my death. I am writing this of my own free will, without the knowledge or presence of my granddaughter, Gracie Coleman. I am writing this because I know my family. I know my son, Mark, and I know my granddaughter, Vivian. The judge paused, letting the names sink in. My father flinched as if he had been struck. I know that when I pass, the judge continued reading, they will not be content with the generous bequests I have left them in the past. They will want control, and because they cannot find a legal flaw in the trust I have created, they will attack the character of the one person who actually cared for me. They will accuse Gracie of manipulating me. They will say she isolated me. They will say I did not know what I was doing. A gasp escaped my mother's lips. It was a sound of pure shock. Grandfather had reached out from the grave and quoted their own motion back to them. But let the record show. The judge read on, his voice gaining strength, that the isolation was not Gracie's doing. It was my choice. I instructed the security team to bar Vivian Coleman from my home following the events of the night of October 31st. Vivian closed her eyes. I saw her hands clench into fists on the table. October 31st, Halloween. I remembered that night. I remembered the shouting. The judge looked up from the paper, his eyes narrowing. The letter continues. On that night, Vivian and Mark arrived unannounced. They brought with them a lawyer I did not know and a stack of documents. They told me it was for tax purposes. They tried to force a pen into my hand. They told me that if I did not sign, the government would take the house. They shouted at me. When I refused, Vivian told me I was a senile old fool who needed to be put in a home. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was a vacuum. My father was staring at his shoes. My mother was weeping into her hands. But they were not the performative tears of earlier. These were tears of humiliation. I called security, the judge read. I had them removed. And that night, I called Kingsley Fiduciary. I told them I needed a trustee who could not be bullied. Because my family does not love me. They love my signature. I am creating this trust not because Gracie asked for it, but because I am terrified that if I leave my assets in my own name, Vivian will find a way to forge what she could not force. The judge lowered the paper. He placed it gently on the desk, treating it with more respect than he had shown any person in the room. This letter, the judge said, his voice cold and hard, describes a man who was terrified. But he was not terrified of the beneficiary you accused. He was terrified of the petitioners. Vivian's lawyer jumped up. It was a reflex, a desperate attempt to stop the bleeding. Objection, the lawyer shouted. Your Honor, this is hearsay. Mr. Vance is not here to be cross-examined. This is an unverified document being used to prove the truth of the matter asserted. It is inadmissible. It was a weak argument, a law school 101 defense thrown up against a tidal wave of truth. Overruled. The judge snapped instantly. This document is admissible under the state of mind exception. It serves to prove the decedent's intent and his mental capacity at the time the trust was formed. It rebuts your claim of undue influence by showing that his decisions were driven by his own independent experiences with your client. But, Your Honor, the lawyer tried to argue. Sit down. Counselor, the judge warned. Unless you want me to hold a hearing on whether your client committed attempted fraud on October 31st, I suggest you stop talking. The lawyer sat down. He slumped in his chair, defeated. He knew it was over. The narrative they had built the story of the helpless old man and the predatory granddaughter had been dismantled. It hadn't just been proven wrong, it had been reversed. Vivian was the predator. Grandfather was the victim who fought back, and I was the witness he had protected. I looked at Vivian. She was staring at the table, her jaw set tight. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She couldn't. The shame was too great. The quiet luxury facade had cracked completely, revealing the desperate, grasping reality underneath. She had walked into this courtroom believing she could rewrite history. She thought that because grandfather was dead, he couldn't speak. She was wrong. He had spoken, and he had screamed. The judge looked at the family again. This court takes a very dim view of parties who attempt to weaponize the legal system to finish a harassment campaign they started while the decedent was alive. This letter changes the complexion of this case entirely. We are no longer discussing probate. We are discussing whether this petition was an act of malice. My mother looked at Vivian's lawyer, her eyes wide with panic. What does that mean? She whispered, her voice carrying in the silent room. What does he mean by malice? It means, the judge answered her, though she hadn't addressed him, that you are dangerously close to paying for the other side's legal fees. And perhaps more. Denise recoiled. Money. It always came back to money for them. The threat of losing face hurt, but the threat of losing money was lethal. Elias Thorne stepped forward again. Your Honor, in light of this statement of intent, the trustee renews the request to dismiss all pending motions. Furthermore, we submit that the filing of the undue influence claim, which contradicts the grantor's explicit written testimony, constitutes a second, distinct violation of the no contest clause. A second violation. The first was the technical challenge to the trust. The second was the attack on my character and the validity of grandfather's mind. Thorne was tightening the noose. He wasn't just defending the trust. He was executing the penalty phase. Vivian lifted her head. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face patchy, but there was still a flicker of that stubborn, senseless pride. She leaned toward her lawyer, whispering something urgent. The lawyer shook his head. He didn't want to hear it. He was done. But Vivian grabbed his arm. She whispered again, harder, finally. She turned to look at me. It was a look of pure, distilled bitterness. It is not over, she mouthed. But the words had no weight. They floated across the room like ash. Her voice, usually so commanding, so full of the assumption that the world owed her everything, seemed small. It sounded like the voice of a child who had been told no for the first time in her life. I looked at the letter on the judge's desk. I imagined grandfather sitting in his study on that cold November night, his hands shaking slightly as he wrote, his heart heavy with the knowledge that his own children were his enemies. He had been so lonely. I had tried to fill that silence, but I couldn't fix the hole they had left. But he had fixed it himself. He had turned his pain into a fortress. You are right, Vivian, I said, speaking clearly enough for the judge to hear. Though I looked only at her, it is not over, because now the judge knows exactly who you are. Order, the judge said, but there was no heat in it. He was just managing the clock now. He looked at the file, then at the calendar. I am going to issue a ruling, the judge said. But before I do, I want to address the gallery. Mr. and Mrs. Coleman. My parents looked up, startled to be addressed directly. You sat there and nodded while your daughter accused this court of facilitating elder abuse, the judge said. You participated in a charade. If this letter is accurate, and I have no reason to doubt it, you were present on the night of October 31st. You knew your father was competent enough to refuse you. You knew he was strong enough to call security. Yet you came here and swore he was weak. My father opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He closed it again. Shame on you, the judge said. It was a simple sentence, but in the quiet courtroom, it hit harder than a gavel. Vivian stared at the table, refusing to look at her parents, refusing to look at me. She was alone. For the first time, the alliance had shattered. The letter had done what I never could. It had driven a wedge of truth right through the center of their conspiracy. Grandfather had left me the house. He had left me the money. But in that moment, I realized the greatest gift he had given me was this scene. He had given me the moment where the lights were turned on, and the monsters were revealed to be nothing but small, greedy people scared of a piece of paper. I took a deep breath. The air in the courtroom didn't smell like vanilla and ambition anymore. It smelled like justice, and it smelled like the crisp, clean paper of a letter that had arrived exactly on time. Judge Sterling placed his palms flat on the bench. The sound of the paper settling on the wood was the only noise in the room. He did not look at the gallery. He did not look at the weeping mother or the stunned father. He looked strictly at the legal counsel and the petitioner. The motion for immediate transfer of control is denied with prejudice, the judge stated. His voice was not loud, but it had the finality of a steel door slamming shut. The court finds that the assets in question are titled to the Arthur P. Vance Revocable Trust. They are outside the jurisdiction of this probate court's emergency powers. Probate is a legal process. Ms. Coleman, it is not a shortcut for you to bypass an estate plan you dislike. Vivian's lawyer, Mr. Sterling, slumped in his chair. He began to pack his briefcase, his movements jerky and nervous. He knew what was coming next. A lawyer knows when they have lost a motion. A good lawyer knows when they have lost the judge. Furthermore, Judge Sterling continued, picking up a pen, I am issuing an order to show cause regarding sanctions. My father, Mark, looked up sharply. Sanctions, he whispered. Does that mean fines? The judge ignored him. Counselor, you and your client are ordered to appear before me in 14 days. You will explain, in writing and in person, why this court should not penalize you for filing a frivolous motion in bad faith. You filed a petition alleging incapacity and elder abuse without a shred of evidence. Directly contradicting the decedent's own notarized statement, you wasted the court's time. You wasted the trustee's time, and you attempted to use the judicial system as a weapon of harassment. Your Honor, Vivian's lawyer stammered. Standing up halfway, we were acting on client instructions regarding save it for the hearing. The judge cut him off. And bring your checkbook. If I find that this filing was malicious, I will order you to pay every cent of the trustee's legal fees. And looking at Mr. Thorne's suit, I imagine those fees are not cheap. Vivian sat frozen. Her face was a mask of shock. She had expected a battle. She had expected an argument. She had not expected to be treated like a delinquent child scrawled on a chalkboard. Elias Thorne, the man in black, stepped forward. He did not look triumphant. He looked efficient. Your Honor, Thorne said, in light of the family's behavior and the aggressive nature of today's filing, the trustee requests a temporary protective order. Vivian's head snapped up. A protective order against whom? Against you and your parents, Thorne said calmly. Not even looking at her, he addressed the judge. We request an order prohibiting Vivian, Mark, and Denise Coleman from contacting any financial institution, custodian, or property manager associated with the Vance estate. We also request a no-contact order regarding the beneficiary, Gracie Coleman, to prevent further intimidation. This is ridiculous, Vivian shouted. She stood up, knocking her chair back against the rail. You are treating us like criminals. I am his granddaughter. You cannot ban me from calling the bank. You cannot ban me from talking to my own sister, Miss Coleman. Sit down, the judge warned. No, Vivian cried out, pointing at me. She is the one who stole it. She is the one who turned him against us. And now you are letting this corporate robot lock us out. They are robbing my family. Your Honor, they are stealing our legacy right in front of you. The judge looked at her. His expression was one of profound exhaustion. Ms. Coleman, the judge said, this is a court of law. It is not a family therapy session. I do not care about your feelings of betrayal. I care about the law. And the law says you just accused your sister of a felony to try and seize $50 million. You do not get to throw accusations like that and then complain when the other side puts up a wall. He signed the paper in front of him. The scratching of the pen was loud and aggressive. Protective order granted, the judge declared, effective immediately. If you or your parents attempt to access any account, enter any property belonging to the trust, or harass Ms. Gracie Coleman, you will be held in contempt of court. That means jail time. Ms. Coleman, do I make myself clear? My mother let out a terrified gasp. Jail, she squeaked. She grabbed my father's arm. Mark, let's go. We have to go. They were not afraid of moral judgment. They had no shame about what they had done to grandfather, but they were terrified of inconvenience. They were terrified of handcuffs. The word jail had cut through their entitlement faster than any moral argument could. We are leaving, my father said, standing up abruptly. He did not look at Vivian. He did not look at me. He looked at the exit sign. Vivian, come on. The judge said leave. Vivian looked at them. Betrayed. Her allies were fleeing the sinking ship. She looked at the judge, who was already moving on to the next file. She looked at Elias Thorne, who was calmly placing his documents back into his briefcase. And then she looked at me. There was no sadness in her eyes. There was no regret. There was only a cold, hard promise of future violence. Court is adjourned, the judge said. The gavel banged. I stood up. My legs felt shaky. But I was standing. I gathered my purse. I did not look back at the table where my family sat. I turned and walked toward the double doors. Walking out of the courtroom felt like surfacing from a deep, dark ocean. The air in the hallway was cooler, cleaner. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with oxygen that didn't taste like lies. I leaned against the wall, closing my eyes for a second. It was over. The attack had been repelled. Breathe, Gracie. You did it. The voice came from beside me. I opened my eyes. Rory Bennett was standing there. He was young, with messy brown hair and a suit that cost a fraction of what Vivian's lawyer wore. But he had the sharpest mind I had ever met. He had been grandfather's junior research assistant years ago, and he had been the one who helped me find the old emails grandfather had saved. He had sat in the back of the gallery today, silent, because we had decided my self-representation would make Vivian underestimate me. We did it, I whispered. I thought, for a minute there, when she brought up the elder abuse. I thought we were going to lose. Rory shook his head. He handed me a bottle of water. No, they were loud, but they were empty. Today wasn't about drama, Gracie. Today was about documentation. We didn't win with tears. We won with the file. The file always wins. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile. Your grandfather knew what he was doing. He didn't just leave you money. He left you a fortress. I took a sip of the water. My hands were finally steady. The judge shut them down completely. The protective order, the sanctions. Vivian is blocked. She is blocked from the legal route. Rory corrected gently. But keep your guard up. A protective order is just paper. It stops honest people. It doesn't stop desperate people. I nodded. He was right. But for now, I wanted to enjoy the victory. I wanted to go home, to the house that was officially, legally protected, and sleep for a week. I'm going to head to the car, Rory said. I'll bring the car around to the front. You wait here. No need to walk past them in the parking lot. Thank you, Rory, I said. He turned and walked toward the elevators. I stood alone in the hallway, watching the courtroom doors. They swung open. My parents came out first. They were walking fast, heads down, arguing in hushed, angry whispers. They didn't see me, or they pretended not to. They hurried toward the stairwell, desperate to escape the scene of their humiliation. Then Vivian came out. She was alone. Her lawyer had already bolted, probably to call his malpractice insurance carrier. Vivian stopped when she saw me. She stood about 20 feet away. The hallway was empty except for us. She didn't scream. She didn't rush at me. She just stood there, adjusting the collar of her cream coat. She looked composed again. The panic from the courtroom was gone, replaced by something much colder. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. I watched her. I expected her to call a car. I expected her to call her husband. But she didn't make a call. Her thumbs moved rapidly across the screen. She was typing a message, a text, or an email. She typed it fast, with a precision that chilled me. Then she hit send. She stared at the screen for a second, a small, tight smile playing on her lips. Then, she noticed me watching her. She didn't look guilty. She didn't look defeated. She flipped the phone over, placing it face down against her palm. Hiding the screen. It was a reflex, a defensive move, like a child hiding a stolen toy. Enjoy the house, Gracie, she said. Her voice was smooth, like nothing had happened. It is a big house, lots of upkeep. Hope you can handle the security system. It can be glitchy. Then she turned and walked away, her heels clicking rhythmically down the marble hall. I frowned. Glitchy. The security system was brand new. Grandfather had updated it 2 months ago. My phone buzzed in my hand. I looked down. It was a text from Rory. Car is outside. But then a second notification popped up. It was from the Kingsley Fiduciary app, the app Elias Thorne had told me to install. Alert failed login attempt. I stared at it. That was normal. Vivian had probably tried to log in earlier. Then another notification. Alert. Failed login attempt. Alert. 2-factor authentication requested. My heart skipped a beat. Someone wasn't just trying to log in. Someone had the password. They were hitting the second layer of security. I looked down the hall. Vivian was gone, but she had just sent a message. She hadn't been texting a friend. She had been signaling someone. The courtroom battle was over, but the war had just moved to a new front, and this time, they weren't using lawyers. They were using keys. I turned and ran toward the elevator. I needed to get to Rory. I needed to tell him that the protective order meant nothing if the enemy was already inside the digital gates. The heavy brass doors of the courthouse swung shut behind us, cutting off the stale air of the legal battlefield. Outside, the morning sun was blindingly bright, a sharp contrast to the dim, wood-paneled room where my family had just tried to dismantle my life. The air was cold, biting at my cheeks, but it felt good. It felt like reality. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the city smog and the scent of damp pavement. I wanted to believe it was over. I wanted to believe that the judge's gavel had been the final punctuation mark on the sentence of my misery. "We need to get coffee," I said, turning to Rory. "I need something with caffeine and sugar, and I need to not think about the word probate for at least 24 hours. Rory did not answer. He had stopped on the second step down, his body rigid. He was looking at his phone. The screen was bright against the shade of the building, and his thumb was hovering over a notification. "Rory," I asked, stepping back toward him, "what is it? Did the judge change his mind?" Rory looked up at me. His face was pale, the triumphant look he had worn in the hallway. The "we won with the file" confidence was gone. It was replaced by the sharp, focused alert of a soldier hearing a twig snap in the dark. "Gracie," he said, his voice low and urgent, "unlock your phone, open the Kingsley app, now." Why, I asked, fumbling for my device. "What happened?" "I just got a push notification from the trustee," Rory said. "It is a level 3 security alert. Subject attempted unauthorized access." My stomach dropped. I tapped the icon for the Kingsley Fiduciary app. My fingers were cold, and the screen seemed to lag for a second before the dashboard loaded. There, right at the top, flashing in a polite but terrifying red banner, "Access blocked. Multiple failed authentication attempts." "Who is doing this?" I whispered. "The hearing finished 10 minutes ago." "We have a protective order. The judge just told them to stop." "The judge told them to stop harassing you physically," Rory said, already dialing a number on his phone. "He didn't say anything about hacking, or maybe he did, and they just don't care." He put the phone on speaker and held it between us. It rang once, then a voice answered. It was not a receptionist. It was a voice that sounded synthetic, perfectly modulated, calm like a machine that had been programmed to handle disasters. "Kingsley Fiduciary Services, Security Division. Please state your case number." "Case number 492 Alpha 7, Rory said, reciting the number from memory. "This is Rory Bennett, legal counsel for the beneficiary, Gracie Coleman. We just received a breach alert. We are standing on the courthouse steps. The beneficiary is with me. Verifying," the voice said. There was the sound of rapid typing, the click of keys that sounded heavy and expensive. "Identity confirmed. Good morning, Mr. Bennett. We have flagged suspicious activity on the Arthur Vance Trust portal." "Define suspicious," Rory said. He was walking now, pacing a small circle on the concrete, his eyes scanning the parking lot as if he expected to see someone watching us. "At 10:18 this morning," the operator said, "we received a login request from a mobile device attempting to access the primary beneficiary dashboard. The user entered the correct username. They entered the correct primary password." I froze. "They have the password?" I asked, my voice rising in panic. "How do they have the password? I changed it last week." Rory held up a hand to silence me. "Go on," he told the operator. The password was entered correctly. The operator continued. "However, the account is protected by multi-factor authentication. Our system sent a 6-digit code to the registered mobile number on file, which belongs to Ms. Coleman. The user on the portal did not enter the code." "Because I didn't get a code," I said, checking my messages. "I have no text." "Correct," the operator said, "because the user did not ask for the code to be sent. Instead, they selected the lost device option. They attempted to bypass the SMS verification by answering the security questions to reset the registered phone number." I felt the blood drain from my face. This wasn't a guess. This wasn't someone trying 1 2 3 4 5 6 or password. This was someone who knew the system. They knew that if they could trigger a lost device protocol, they could swap my phone number for theirs. They could lock me out of my own inheritance and transfer funds before I even knew I had been breached. Did they pass the security questions? Rory asked. His voice was hard, professional. Question 1. The operator read, "What was the name of your first pet?" Answer provided, Barnaby. Correct. Question 2. In what city did your parents meet? Answer provided, Chicago. Correct. Question 3. What is the maiden name of your maternal grandmother? Answer provided, Holloway. Correct. I leaned against the stone railing. I felt sick. Those weren't just random facts. That was family history. Barnaby was the golden retriever we had when I was 6. Only family knew that. They cleared the security wall, Rory said. Then what? They reached the final authorization step. The operator said, the system required a biometric scan or a backup email confirmation. The user attempted to input a new email address, Coleman, private@gmail.com. Coleman, Vivian, she hadn't even bothered to use a burner email. She was so arrogant, so convinced of her own right to this money, that she used her own personal email address to try and hijack the trust. Access was denied. The operator stated, confirming what we already knew but needed to hear. The system recognized that the device being used for the request was not a recognized trusted device. Furthermore, the geolocation of the request was flagged as high risk because it originated from a public network within 500 yards of the registered courthouse, which triggered an anomaly algorithm. Can you identify the device? Rory asked. We have the digital fingerprint, the operator said. It is an iPhone 15 Pro Max, running the latest operating system. The device ID matches a device that previously accessed the guest Wi-Fi at the Vance residence 3 months ago. Vivian, I whispered. The judge mentioned she had logged into the security gate system. It is the same phone. Okay, Rory said. Listen to me. Lock it down. I want a full freeze. Already done. Mr. Bennett, the operator replied. The moment the email change was attempted, the Kingsley Artificial Intelligence Sentinel protocol engaged. The account is in status, hold fraud risk. No changes can be made to the profile, no funds can be moved, and no login will be accepted, even with the correct password, until Ms. Coleman appears in person at our headquarters with 2 forms of government identification. Good, Rory said. Preserve the logs. I want a certified timestamp of every keystroke. I want the IP address, the device ID, and the GPS coordinates. Can you export that to a PDF within the hour? It is already in your inbox. The operator said, Kingsley Fiduciary does not wait. Mr. Bennett, goodbye. The line went dead. Rory lowered the phone. He looked at me. His expression was grim. She is insane, Rory said. She is actually insane. We are standing outside the courthouse where she just got sanctioned for bad faith. And she decides to commit wire fraud before she even gets to her car. I thought back to the hallway. I saw Vivian standing there. I saw the way she had pulled out her phone. I saw the way she had typed fast, precise, furious. I remembered the way she had flipped the phone over when she saw me looking. She hadn't been texting her husband to complain. She hadn't been emailing her lawyer. She had been answering security questions. What was the name of your first pet, Barnaby? She was typing the name of the dog we both played with as children to steal the money our grandfather left to protect me from her. She thinks she is smarter than the system. I said, she thinks that because she knows the answers to the security questions, she is entitled to the account. She doesn't understand that the trust isn't a family quiz. It is a bank vault. Rory was already typing on his phone. He wasn't calling a car anymore. He was working. What are you doing? I asked. I am emailing the court clerk, Rory said, his thumbs flying across the glass screen. I am not going to make a scene. I am not going to call the judge's chambers and scream. I am going to be very, very boring. He stopped typing for a second to read what he had written. Dear Madam Clerk, Rory read aloud. Pursuant to the proceedings in the matter of the Vance estate, concluded at 10:15 this morning, please find attached a security report from the trustee. Please note that at 10:18, 3 minutes after the adjournment, An individual using a device registered to the petitioner attempted to bypass multi-factor authentication to seize control of the trust assets. We are submitting this as supplemental evidence for the upcoming sanctions hearing. Regards, Rory Bennett. He hit send. 3 minutes, Rory said, shaking his head. She couldn't even wait 5 minutes. That timestamp is going to hang her. Gracie, the judge is going to look at that time. 10:15. He says stop. 10:18. She tries to break in. That isn't just contempt of court. That is open defiance. I looked out at the parking lot. I could see the cars moving in the distance. I wondered where she was. Was she sitting in her luxury SUV, staring at her phone, wondering why the screen said access denied? Was she screaming, or was she just sitting there in that terrifying, cold silence, planning her next move? This changes things, I said. Before today, it was just a dispute. It was ugly, but it was civil. It was about who gets the house and the cars. Yes, Rory agreed. Now it is criminal. Attempted wire fraud, identity theft, unauthorized access to a protected computer system. These are federal crimes. Gracie, if we wanted to, we could call the FBI right now. No, I said, not yet. Grandfather wanted to win, but he didn't want a circus. If we call the FBI, it becomes a headline. Heiress arrested. I don't want that. So what do? Rory asked. We let the trap finish closing. I said, she just put her hand in the cookie jar, and the lid slammed down. Now we let the judge see it. The sanctions hearing is in 2 weeks. By the time we walk back in there, this report will be the first thing on his desk. Rory nodded. You are learning. I had a good teacher, I said, thinking of the man in the black suit. But Gracie, Rory warned, his voice serious again. You need to understand something. Vivian just proved she has no bottom. She knows the passwords. She knows the security questions. She has the personal data, the digital wall held today. But she is going to keep hammering at it. She isn't going to stop because of an error message. I know. I said, she just created a permanent record. Rory said, that is the ink stain. She can't wash that timestamp away. She can't say it was a mistake. You don't accidentally answer 3 security questions and input a new email address. She has marked herself. I looked down at my phone. The red banner was still there on the Kingsley app. Hold fraud risk. It looked like a warning. But for the first time, I saw it as a shield. The system worked. The man in the black suit had told the truth. Let's go. I said, I want to get away from here before she realizes her login failed. I don't want to be here when she comes back to try again. She won't come back. Rory said, she is too smart for that. She knows she triggered an alarm. She is probably running. Good. I said, let her run. She can run as fast as she wants, but she can't outrun a timestamp. We walked down the remaining steps to the sidewalk. The city noise swallowed us up, the honking taxis, the construction drills, the chatter of pedestrians. It was loud and chaotic, but it felt safe compared to the silent, deadly war being fought on the servers of Kingsley Fiduciary Services. I checked my phone one last time. No new texts, no new emails, just the silence of a blocked attack. Vivian had tried to stab me in the back one more time, but this time, her knife had hit steel, and the sound of that impact was going to echo all the way back to the judge's bench. We had to go back inside. It was a mundane reason, the kind of administrative triviality that often dictates the pace of legal warfare. Rory checked his briefcase as we stood on the sidewalk and realized the court clerk had failed to stamp the receipt for the original filing of our opposition. Without that stamped copy, we technically had no proof we had appeared if the digital system crashed. In a case where my sister was already trying to hack the servers, Rory was taking 0 chances with digital records. We need the ink, Rory said. We need the physical stamp. So we turned around. We walked back up the granite steps, past the security checkpoint where the guards now nodded at us with a flicker of recognition, and back into the cool, marble-lined hallway outside Department 4. I expected the corridor to be empty. I assumed my family had fled the scene of their humiliation immediately after Vivian had sent her text message and walked away. I assumed they were already halfway to the country club, ordering stiff drinks to wash down the taste of sanctions. I was wrong. They were still there. Mark and Denise Coleman were standing near the water fountain, huddled in a tense, whispered argument. My father's face was red, his hands gesturing wildly. My mother looked pale, clutching her handbag to her chest as if it contained the last of her dignity. Vivian was standing a few feet away from them, scrolling on her phone, her back turned to her parents. The physical distance between them spoke volumes. The united front had dissolved into 3 separate islands of panic. Rory put a hand on my arm to stop me. We stood in the shadow of a pillar, unseen. Then, the elevator doors at the far end of the hall opened with a soft chime. A man stepped out. He did not look like a lawyer. He did not look like a client. He wore a windbreaker that was slightly too large for him and comfortable walking shoes. He held a clipboard and a thick brown envelope. He looked like a delivery driver or a maintenance supervisor. He had that specific quality of invisibility that people in his profession cultivated. I felt a sudden jolt of anxiety. My first thought was that Vivian had called for reinforcements. My second thought was that she was suing me again. Right here in the hallway, piling on another frivolous motion just to keep me buried in paperwork. I instinctively stepped back, bracing myself for him to call my name. The man walked past me without even glancing in my direction. He walked past Rory. He walked with a singular, boring purpose straight toward the group by the water fountain. He stopped directly in front of my father. "Mr. Mark Coleman?" the man asked. His voice was flat, professional, and loud enough to carry down the echoey corridor. My father stopped arguing with my mother. He turned around, looking annoyed at the interruption. "Yes," my father snapped. "I am Mark Coleman. What do you want?" The man did not answer. He simply extended his hand and thrust the brown envelope against my father's chest. Mark's reflexes took over, and he grabbed it before it could fall to the floor. "You have been served," the man said. He made a note on his clipboard, checked the time on his wristwatch, and turned to walk away. It was efficient. It was brutal. It was over in 4 seconds. My father looked down at the envelope. I saw the color drain from his face. It was not the gradual paling of someone receiving bad news. It was instant. It was the look of a man who had been walking on a tightrope and just looked down to see the net was gone. This was not a probate court envelope. It was too thick, and the seal on the corner was different. My mother, Denise, leaned in, her eyes wide. "Mark," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What is that? Is it from the trust?" Mark did not answer. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely tear the strip to open the package. He ripped it open, tearing the top of the documents inside. He pulled out the first page. I saw the header from where I stood. It was bold. Black text. Superior Court of the State of New York. Civil Division. Plaintiff, the Stratton Investment Group. Defendant Mark A. Coleman. Complaint for fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty. The air in the hallway seemed to vanish. My father made a sound that was half gasp, half groan. He staggered back, leaning against the wall for support. "It is a lie," he whispered. He looked up, his eyes wild. He looked at my mother. "It is a lie. Dad said he fixed this. He promised me he fixed this." Vivian turned around slowly. She looked at the papers in her father's hands. She looked at the header. She did not rush to help him. She did not ask if he was okay. She looked at the document with the cold, calculating eye of someone assessing damage to her own reputation. "Dad," Vivian said, her voice sharp. "What is Stratton Investment Group?" My father could not speak. He was hyperventilating. This wasn't about the inheritance. This wasn't about the house or the cars or the trust. This was separate. This was a lawsuit alleging that Mark Coleman had been stealing money from his own business partners. And then I realized, Grandfather had known. The memories flooded back. 2 years ago, my father had come to the house late at night. He had been crying. He had spent 3 hours in the study with Grandfather. When he left, Grandfather looked 10 years older. He had told me, "Gracie, Sometimes you have to pay the devil to leave the room. But the devil always comes back. Grandfather had paid off a debt for my father to keep him out of jail, but he must have kept the records. He must have kept the proof, and when he died, when the protection of his checkbook was gone, the creditors had come back. Or perhaps Grandfather had set a trigger. Perhaps he had instructed Kingsley Fiduciary to release certain files to the Stratton Group if the family contested the will. It was a second trap. A trap designed not for the greedy granddaughter, but for the corrupt son. Denise saw us. She saw me and Rory standing by the pillar, her face twisted into a mask of pure, irrational fury. She pointed a finger at me. "This is you," she screamed. Her voice echoed off the marble walls, shrill and hysterical. "You did this. You gave them the records. You are trying to destroy your father." She started to march toward me, her heels clacking loudly on the floor. She looked ready to physically attack me. Suddenly, the heavy double doors of the courtroom opened again. Judge Sterling stepped out. He was not wearing his robe anymore. He was in a suit, carrying a leather briefcase, clearly heading to his chambers for the lunch recess. But he stopped dead when he saw the scene. He saw the process server walking away. He saw my father slumped against the wall, holding a complaint for fraud. He saw my mother screaming at me with her finger pointed in my face. "Mr. and Mrs. Coleman," the judge boomed. His voice was not the polite judicial voice he used on the bench. It was the voice of a man who had absolutely ran out of patience. My mother froze. She spun around. "Your Honor," she cried out, switching instantly to victim mode. "She is harassing us. She sent a server to humiliate my husband right outside your courtroom. It is retaliation. You have to stop her." The judge walked slowly toward them. He looked at the envelope in Mark's hand. He saw the civil case number. He saw the nature of the complaint. This was not served by this court. The judge said, his eyes flicking to the process server, who was already disappearing into the elevator. And looking at the header, "This is a fraud complaint from an investment firm. Unless your daughter owns Stratton Investment Group, she did not send this." "She is behind it," my mother insisted, tears streaming down her face. "She wants to ruin us." The judge looked at my father. Mark was staring at the floor, unable to meet the judge's eyes. "Mr. Coleman," the judge said. His voice was dangerously quiet. "You just stood in my courtroom, under oath, and testified that you were concerned about the financial management of the estate. You testified that you were the responsible party. You testified that you wanted to protect the assets from incompetence." My father swallowed hard. I only meant..." "And yet," the judge continued, relentless, "here you are, 5 minutes later, being served with a lawsuit for embezzlement." The word hung in the air. Embezzlement. "Do you understand how that looks, Mr. Coleman?" the judge asked. "Do you understand that credibility is the currency of my courtroom? You are already facing a sanctions hearing for bad faith. Now, it appears you may have committed perjury by presenting yourself as a fit fiduciary while actively hiding a fraud investigation." My father said nothing. He looked like he wanted to vanish into the drywall. "This is a separate matter," Vivian interjected. She stepped forward, trying to put herself between her father and the judge. "This has nothing to do with the probate case. It has everything to do with it," the judge countered, turning his gaze on Vivian. "You claimed your family was the only moral authority here. You claimed your sister was the villain, but it seems the only people with secrets in this hallway are the ones standing on your side of the aisle." He looked at Denise. "Stop the drama, Mrs. Coleman," the judge ordered. "Stop blaming the beneficiary for the consequences of your husband's actions. If I hear one more outburst in this hallway, I will have the bailiff detain you for disorderly conduct. Do not test me." He stared at them for one long, agonizing second. Then he turned and walked away toward his chambers, leaving them standing in the wreckage of their own reputation. Vivian turned to look at her parents. For the first time, I saw it. The crack in her armor was real. She wasn't looking at them with sympathy. She wasn't looking at them with anger. She was looking at them with fear. She realized they were liabilities. Mark was being sued for fraud. Denise was hysterical. They were dragging her down. If she stayed attached to them, she would drown with them. Vivian Coleman did not drown. Vivian Coleman climbed on top of other people to stay dry. She took a step back, then another step. "I need to call my office," Vivian muttered. She didn't look at her father. She didn't offer to hold his hand. She walked away, moving fast toward the exit, leaving her parents alone with the lawsuit. Rory squeezed my arm. "Let's go," he whispered. I looked at my father one last time. He was sliding down the wall, clutching the paper that grandfather had warned him about years ago. The devil always comes back. I felt a strange sensation. It wasn't pity. It wasn't hate. It was the realization that the justice system was a machine. Grandfather had programmed it. He had fed the data into the system. And now, the gears were turning. Rory pulled me gently toward the clerk's office. "Don't say a word," Rory murmured as we walked away. "Don't look back. Don't gloat. Everything they are doing right now is evidence." The judge saw the lawsuit. He saw the reaction. He saw the lie. "Gracie, do you understand what just happened?" Rory asked as we turned the corner. Out of sight. "Yes," I said. My voice was steady. "Grandfather didn't just lock the door to the money. He set traps on the front lawn. He separated the files." Rory said, "That is the brilliance of it. The probate court handles the will. The civil court handles the fraud. The criminal division might handle the wiretap. They are fighting a war on 3 fronts, and they only brought enough ammo for one." I took a deep breath. The image of my father's terrified face was burned into my mind. He knew. I said, "Grandfather knew that if they came for me, they would have to expose themselves. He made sure that to destroy me, they would have to destroy themselves first." Rory nodded. He pushed open the door to the clerk's office. "Let's get this document stamped," he said, "and then let's get you out of here. I have a feeling the Coleman family reunion is about to get very ugly, and I don't want you anywhere near the splatter." I walked into the quiet, dusty office of the clerk. The sound of stamping paper filled the room. Thump, thump. It sounded like a heartbeat. It sounded like the steady, relentless march of the truth. My father had the lawsuit. Vivian had the security breach. My mother had the judge's warning. They had walked in this morning as a phalanx, a solid wall of wealth and power. Now they were scattered, terrified, and turning on each other, and all I had done was wait for the last person to arrive. 2 weeks later, the atmosphere in Department 4 had changed completely. During the first hearing, the room had crackled with the energy of a battlefield. There had been shouting, weeping, and the sharp electricity of a family tearing itself apart. But today, the room felt sterile. It felt like an operating theater where a limb was about to be amputated to save the body. The air was cold, recycled, and smelled faintly of floor wax and fear. I sat at the table with Rory Bennett. My hands were folded on the mahogany surface. I was not shaking this time. I was watching. Across the aisle, the Coleman family phalanx had crumbled. My father, Mark, sat at the far end of the table, staring blankly at the wall. He had aged 10 years and 14 days. The lawsuit from the Stratton Investment Group regarding his embezzlement was not the subject of today's hearing, but it hung over him like a shroud. He was a man who knew his own execution date was set, just in a different courtroom. My mother, Denise, sat next to him, but she did not touch him. She kept checking her watch, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for an exit that did not exist. And then there was Vivian. She was still wearing expensive clothes, a charcoal gray suit that screamed professionalism, but the armor was dented. Her posture was too rigid. Her eyes were rimmed with the redness of sleepless nights. She did not look at me. She stared straight ahead at the empty judge's bench. Her jaw set in a line of grim determination. Her lawyer, Mr. Sterling, looked like a man walking to the gallows. He was shuffling papers nervously, avoiding eye contact with everyone, especially the man in the black suit standing near the clerk's desk. Elias Thorne looked exactly the same as he had 2 weeks ago. Same black suit, same white shirt, same terrifying stillness. He was the only constant in the chaos. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Judge Sterling entered the room. He did not breeze in. He walked with a heavy, deliberate pace. He took his seat, adjusted his glasses, and looked down at the assembly. He did not smile. "We are back on the record," the judge said. "This is the return on the order to show cause regarding sanctions for bad faith filing, and the trustee's motion for a protective order confirmation." He looked directly at Vivian's lawyer. "Counselor," the judge said, "2 weeks ago, you filed an emergency motion to seize control of an estate that was already held in a private trust. You claimed urgency based on facts that were proven to be false by the decedent's own hand. I ordered you to explain why I should not penalize you and your client for wasting this court's time. Mr. Sterling stood up slowly. He cleared his throat. "Your Honor," the lawyer began, his voice lacking all of its previous bluster, "we would like to formally withdraw the motion filed on that date. We acknowledge that. Mistakes were made in the heat of the moment. My client was acting out of grief and a misunderstanding of the legal structure. We apologize to the court and to the trustee. We believe this settles the matter. It was a classic legal maneuver. Apologize, withdraw, and hope the judge just wants to clear his docket." Judge Sterling stared at him. The silence stretched for 10 seconds. "You think an apology settles the matter?" the judge asked. His voice was dangerously soft. "You think you can ring a bell that loud and then just ask everyone to unhear it because you realized you were wrong?" "We are withdrawing the request." "Your Honor," the lawyer repeated, sweating slightly, "the motion is moot." The judge agreed, "but the intent behind it is not. The record shows that Kingsley Fiduciary Services sent you a digital copy of the trust, including the no contest clause, at 4 o'clock the day before you filed. You opened that email at 4:30, yet at 9 o'clock the next morning, you stood here and told me you had no knowledge of a trust." The lawyer looked down at his shoes. I failed to communicate the contents to my client in time." "Or," the judge said, leaning forward, "you and your client decided to race the clock. You decided to try and get a court order signed before the trustee could appear. That is not a mistake. Counselor, that is a strategy, and it is a strategy that relies on deceiving the court." Vivian shifted in her seat. She looked like she wanted to interrupt, but she bit her lip. "I am not accepting your withdrawal as a cure," the judge stated. "The sanctions stand, but before I determine the amount, I need to hear from the trustee regarding the events that transpired immediately after the hearing." The judge turned his head toward Elias Thorne. "Mr. Thorne, you submitted a supplemental declaration regarding digital interference." "I did, Your Honor," Thorne said. Stepping forward, he held a document in his hand. It was not a thin envelope this time. It was a thick stack of server logs, bound with a metal clip. "Please summarize for the record," the judge said. Thorne placed the stack on the podium. He did not look at Vivian. He spoke to the air, his voice devoid of emotion. At 10:18 in the morning on the date of the last hearing, Thorne stated, exactly 3 minutes after this court recessed, the secure portal for the Arthur Vance Trust received a login attempt. The user entered the correct username and password for the beneficiary account belonging to Gracie Coleman. My mother gasped softly. She put a hand to her mouth. The user attempted to bypass the multi-factor authentication. Thorne continued. When the system requested a code sent to Ms. Coleman's phone, the user selected the lost device protocol. They successfully answered 3 security questions regarding the family history of the grantor. They then attempted to change the recovery email address to a personal Gmail account, Coleman, private@gmail.com, Thorne paused, He let the email address hang in the room. The IP address of the device used for this attempt, Thorne said, matches the unique device identifier of an iPhone registered to Vivian Coleman. The geolocation data places the device within the precinct of this courthouse at the exact time of the attempt. Vivian stood up. She couldn't help herself. "That is not true," she snapped. "I mean, it wasn't me. My assistant has access to my phone. She must have been trying to help. It was a misunderstanding, I thought. I thought we were supposed to register as beneficiaries." "Sit down," Ms. Coleman, the judge barked. It was a glitch, Vivian insisted, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. I was just trying to see the file. I wasn't trying to steal anything. You answered the security question about the name of the first family pet, the judge said, looking at the report Thorne had provided. Did your assistant know the name of a dog you owned 30 years ago, or did you type that in yourself? Vivian froze. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She had been caught in the lie. The timestamp, the geolocation, the specific knowledge it was a fingerprint she could not wipe away. This was not a glitch, the judge said, his face hard as stone. This was a cyber attack. You walked out of my courtroom after being warned about harassment, and 3 minutes later, you tried to hack your sister's account. That shows a level of contempt for this legal process that I have rarely seen. Your Honor, Vivian's lawyer pleaded, my client is under extreme stress. We are past stress. The judge cut him off. We are in the territory of criminal intent. Elias Thorne raised his hand slightly. It was a small gesture, but it commanded immediate attention. Your Honor, Thorne said, if I may? Go ahead, Mr. Thorne, the judge allowed. The trustee views this digital incursion not merely as harassment, Thorne said. We view it as a hostile action under Article 12 of the trust instrument. Vivian rolled her eyes. Oh, stop it with the articles. It is just a bank account. Thorne turned slowly to face her. For the first time. A flicker of something human crossed his face. It was not anger. It was pity. It is not just a bank account. Ms. Coleman, Thorne said softly, and I am not just a trustee. He turned back to the judge. Your Honor, there is a provision in the trust that was not relevant in the first hearing because the attacks were external. However, now that the attack has come from a family member attempting to subvert the security protocols, I must disclose the full capacity of my role. Thorne reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, black leather wallet. He opened it to reveal a silver badge and a secondary identification card. I am not merely the administrator from Kingsley Fiduciary, Thorne announced. I am the appointed trust protector. The room went silent. Even Rory, sitting next to me, sat up straighter. Trust protector, the judge repeated, leaning forward with interest. Yes, Your Honor. Thorne said, Mr. Vance did not trust that a standard corporate trustee would be aggressive enough to stop his family. He knew that corporate trustees often settle to avoid litigation, so he appointed a trust protector with specific, expanded powers. Thorne looked at Vivian. As trust protector, Thorne explained, I have the unilateral authority to interpret the bad faith clause of the trust. I do not need a court order to determine if a beneficiary has forfeited their rights. I have the power to make that determination internally, based on the actions I observe. Vivian's lawyer turned pale. Wait, you are saying you can just decide? That is the definition of the role. Thorne replied coolly, the grantor gave me the power of the veto and the power of the sword. The hacking attempt on the portal was a direct violation of the integrity of the trust. Under Article 12, Section 4, the trust protector may permanently disinherit any individual who attempts to access funds through fraudulent means. Thorne paused. The weight of his words settled on the room like a heavy blanket. I am informing the court, Thorne said, that as of 10:18 a.m. 2 weeks ago, I have exercised that power. Vivian Coleman has been removed from the schedule of beneficiaries, not by a judge, by me, under the authority granted by Arthur Vance. Vivian looked as if she had been shot. You can't do that. That is illegal. I have rights. I have due process. You had due process. The judge interrupted her. You had a hearing. You had a warning. And then you tried to break into the vault. The judge looked at Thorne with a new level of respect. He understood what this meant. This wasn't a probate case anymore. This was a private contract enforcement. The grandfather had built a machine that didn't just defend itself. It counterattacked. The court acknowledges the standing of the trust protector. The judge ruled, Mr. Vance had the right to set conditions on his gifts. If one of those conditions was, do not try to hack the account, and you violated it, Then the consequences are yours to bear, Your Honor. Vivian screamed. This is a conspiracy. He is working with Gracie. I have never met Ms. Gracie Coleman before 2 weeks ago, Thorne said calmly. My loyalty is to the document, and the document says you are out. The judge banged his gavel. It was a sharp, cracking sound. Here is my ruling, the judge stated. Regarding the sanctions, Vivian Coleman and her counsel are jointly ordered to pay the legal fees of the trustee and Ms. Gracie Coleman for this entire proceeding. The amount will be determined based on the invoices submitted. I am setting the initial penalty at $50,000 for bad faith filing. $50,000. My father winced. My mother sobbed into her hands. It was a lot of money, even for them. But compared to what Vivian had just lost her entire inheritance, it was pennies. Regarding the protective order, the judge continued, it is made permanent for a period of 5 years. If you approach Ms. Gracie Coleman, or if you attempt to access the Kingsley servers again, you will be arrested for contempt of court. This is your final warning. And regarding the status of the trust, the judge finished, looking at Thorne. The court declines to interfere with the decisions of the trust protector. If the trust says she is disinherited, then she is disinherited. The case is closed. Court is adjourned. The judge stood up and walked out. The bailiff opened the doors. Denise Coleman broke down completely. She wasn't crying because she missed her father. She wasn't crying because her family was broken. She was crying because she realized, for the first time in her life, that she had absolutely no control. She looked at Vivian, her golden child, her retirement plan, her pride, and saw only a liability. You fix nothing, Denise hissed at Vivian through her tears. You said you would handle it. You said you were smarter than her. Vivian did not answer her mother. She did not look at her father, who sat like a stone statue, staring at nothing, crushed by the weight of the fraud lawsuit waiting for him in the hallway. Vivian turned her head slowly. She looked across the aisle at me. I looked back. I expected to see hate. I expected to see the same fire I had seen 2 weeks ago, but I didn't. I saw shock. It was the look of a person who had spent her entire life believing that rules were things that applied to other people. She believed that charm, money, and aggression could bend reality. She believed that she could talk her way out of anything, but she couldn't talk her way out of a timestamp. She couldn't charm a trust protector. She couldn't bully a piece of paper. Her eyes were wide, glassy, and terrified. She looked at me, and her expression said, I cannot believe I lost to a document. I stood up. Rory packed his briefcase. Come on. Gracie, Rory said, we are done here. I walked past my family. I walked past the crying mother and the silent father. I walked past my sister, who was still sitting in her chair, gripping the edge of the table as if it were the only thing keeping her from falling off the earth. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Grandfather had said it all for me. The mask had fallen. The quiet luxury was gone. All that was left was a messy, greedy tragedy, exposed under the harsh fluorescent lights of the law, and the man in the black suit, the trust protector, watched us go. His face as unreadable as the stone walls of the courthouse. He had done his job. The fortress held. 3 days after the sanctions hearing, the war did not end with a bang. It ended with a notification sound on my phone. I was sitting in my grandfather's study, surrounded by the smell of old leather and pipe tobacco. When the email arrived, it was from the court clerk, CCing Rory Bennett and Elias Thorne. The subject line was dry and administrative: final order on motion for sanctions and determination of beneficiary status. I opened the file. There were no theatrics in the legal text. There was only the cold, hard weight of consequences. Judge Sterling had signed the order confirming that the no contest clause had been triggered. The document cited 2 specific events: the bad faith filing of the emergency petition and the documented digital intrusion into the trust portal. The judge wrote that these actions constituted a direct attack on the integrity of the estate. The ruling was absolute. Vivian Coleman was declared to have forfeited her entire share of the trust. Her status was changed from primary beneficiary to predeceased for the purposes of distribution. I stared at the word predeceased in the eyes of the trust. My sister was effectively dead. The system at Kingsley Fiduciary Services moved instantly. I received a second email from Elias Thorne. It was a security update. The trust had gone into total lockdown. The portal was now accessible only through biometric verification at a physical terminal or via a secure link sent directly to Rory. Any attempt to change a password, an email address, or a phone number would require a face-to-face meeting with a trust officer. The family was walled out. Any communication from Mark, Denise, or Vivian Coleman was to be routed immediately to legal counsel. If they sent a birthday card, it went to a lawyer. If they sent a text, it went to a lawyer. Then came the first distribution. It did not come in a suitcase full of cash. It came as a series of sterile, beautiful bank alerts. The house was officially titled in my name, bypassing the probate court entirely. The investment accounts were transferred to my control. With a receipt generated for tax purposes, there was no applause, there was no victory party. There was just the quiet hum of a printer in the corner of the room, spitting out the confirmation pages. Click, whir, click. It was the sound of safety. But grandfather had saved one final surprise for the end. It was hidden in the last section of the trust, a section that Elias Thorne had not revealed until the forfeiture was final. Rory called me to explain it. "Gracie," Rory said on the phone, his voice filled with a kind of awed respect. "You need to read Article 15. Your grandfather was a genius." I turned to the page. It was titled, "The Alice Vance Memorial Scholarship Fund." Grandfather had set aside a significant portion of the estate to create a charitable foundation in honor of my grandmother. It was designed to be prestigious, the kind of charity that gets your picture in the society pages, the kind of legacy Vivian had always fantasized about controlling. She had talked for years about how she would run the family foundation, how she would host the galas, how she would be the face of the Vance benevolence. But there was a condition. The text read, "Any beneficiary who has triggered the no contest clause or who has been subject to a protective order regarding another family member shall be permanently barred from serving on the board, attending functions, or having their name associated in any public capacity with this foundation." I felt a chill run through me. Grandfather knew Vivian better than anyone. He knew that losing the money would hurt her, but being erased from the social legacy would destroy her. She could not play the role of the benevolent heiress anymore. She could not stand on a stage and talk about family values. If she tried, the trust protector would step in and publicly remove her. She had lost her money, and now she had lost her reputation. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was my father. I did not answer. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to the message later. His voice was cracked, desperate. He sounded like a man who had been running for a long time and had finally hit a wall. "Gracie," he said, "please, we need to talk. The lawsuit. The Stratton people are going to take everything. Can't we work something out? A family settlement? Vivian is furious, but I can talk to her. We are family. Gracie, doesn't that mean anything?" I deleted the message. Rory sent a formal letter in response. It was one sentence long. The trust prohibits negotiation with parties who have engaged in bad faith litigation against the primary beneficiary. They had tried to steal the house. They had tried to paint me as a criminal. They had tried to hack my account 3 minutes after a court hearing. They did not want a settlement. They wanted a lifeline. And grandfather had made sure I was not holding the rope. I sat back in grandfather's leather chair. The house was quiet. For the first time in 6 months, I did not feel the crushing weight of anxiety. I did not feel the need to look over my shoulder. I looked at the thick manila folder on the desk. It contained everything: the medical affidavits, the server logs, the handwritten letter, the judge's order. It was just paper. But it was stronger than any scream, stronger than any lie, stronger than any guilt trip my mother could invent. I closed the folder. I felt a sensation I hadn't expected. It wasn't joy. It wasn't gloating. It was lighter than that. It felt like cutting a heavy rope that had been tied around my neck for 30 years. My family had tried to write a story about me. They had written a tragedy where I was the villain and they were the heroes. But they forgot that in the real world. You cannot edit the truth. I thought about what I would tell people if they asked how I won. I wouldn't tell them about the arguments. I wouldn't tell them about the tears. I smiled, running my hand over the smooth cover of the file. When someone wants to erase you with a story, do not try to win with another story. Win with evidence. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment below sharing your location and your thoughts on Gracie's victory. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Helena Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach even more people.